My wife had one, and I had one. So I made it to fit hers and mine, and occasionally I could borrow her gun, and if I wanted to wear it, well, I could borrow her gun and put it in the other holster. Uh, but I worked on this thing for a month, I guess. I mean, little bitty flowers on it, real small stems, really intricate carving on it. First time I'd ever tried to do anything like that. All of my saddle work that I'd done was huge old flowers and big old leaves, and I just got tired of that and wanted to do something different. So that's what I did on that. I had several different kinds of flowers on it, and back then that was unheard of. Of course now that's a popular thing to do. But I worked on it, and got it all tooled, and got it all, the linings glued in, and got it all ready to sew. And about 40 miles, I believe, to a town that was big enough that had a Western store, and they happened to have a little leather shop in it, and had one guy working in it, and they had a Landis 16, and so I took it in there and asked him if he would sew it, and he said sure, and he sewed it. And there was a young lady working in the Western store, and she come over and was looking at it, oohing and ahhing, and looked over to this guy that she worked with, and she said, "Well, that's really nice. Why don't you ever do anything like that?" And it kind of upset this leather worker. But I got it sewed, and I wore it occasionally. But down there we didn't have much of a. There weren't shooting. I was testing something, and at the trailer park that we lived at, each trailer had maybe a 10 by 10 concrete block storage building. And whatever it was, I needed to fire a blank in it. And actually all it was the primer. I put a primer in it, and I know what it was. I was working on the hammer spring, and I needed to, I got it real light so I could cock it real easy, but I didn't know where I'd got it too light or not to fire the primer. So I wanted to fire a primer just to see if it was going to work. And so I went, I figured, man, in that concrete block building, well, won't be no problem, just that primer. And so I went out there and shut the door and tried a couple. Well, in about an hour, a policeman showed up at our door, and he wanted to know about it, what was going on, and so I told him what the deal was. And oh man, he got excited. He wanted to see see my stuff, and he wanted to see me draw, and he said, "Man, this is something." He was really excited about it. Never did say anything more about me shooting the primers. He forgot about that. So he made some comment about the lady that turned me in, and it couldn't have been very loud, but it didn't matter. She didn't like it. But from then until I got out, well, I didn't do a whole lot. The club, the fast draw club that I belonged to in Fort Worth, we had a little group inside of the club that would put on skits. We would go to schools, and we'd go here and there and put on little skits. So one of the guys from my unit run this recreational center in our part of the buddies. And he come to me one day and he said, how about getting your guys that you work with on these skits and see if they'll come down and put on something for us? Oh, we got excited about that, and doing that on an Army base, we thought that was cool. And there was 5 of us, and one of them had an old double-barrel shotgun, and the rest of us used pistols. But we had shootouts, and the skit where the sheriff tried to arrest somebody, and of course he resisted, and it was a shootout. And before it was over with, they lined us up with 3 of those centers in one day. And our skit run about 45 minutes. And they spaced us an hour apart. From the time that we got through with this one, we had an hour to pack up, get to the next one, and unpack and get ready there. Well, we was about 30 minutes late for the second one. And by the time we got to the third one, we was a little bit over an hour late. But they was patiently waiting on us. But in the my mother and my dad had brought had come down with, my brother was in it, and so my mother and dad, and at that time Evelyn, my wife, was still living in Fort Worth. She hadn't come down. This was close to the first of the year that I was down there. So they come down, both girls come down, and so my brother Donnie was the guy, the sheriff that was trying to arrest the bad guy. Well, as the script went, the bad guy had a shotgun, and he was supposed to end up shooting the sheriff. And of course, there was blanks, and we always was real careful about our shells. And he shot the sheriff, and my youngest daughter just screamed out in the audience, said, "They shot my uncle!" And everybody just, that was the highlight of the whole thing from my daughter. Oh goodness. We still kid her about that every once in a while. Her name was Valerie. So we, every once in a while that comes up. But we had a good time, even though we was pooped. Man, we was give out to the end of that day. And Mother and Dad and the bunch of guys that come down, they spent the night. I think that the Army put them up somewhere. And they spent the night and went back the next morning. And they was only there for a day. They drove down the day before and got there that night. Worked all, this was on Sunday, worked all day Sunday, and then the next morning got in the car and drove back to Fort Worth, which is a 4-hour drive. But then after that, well, that got to be, you know, everybody wanted more of it. And of course they couldn't come back, so they got me to put on some things. So I ended up making some more holsters and changing things around a little bit. But holsters was about the extent of the year that I was in the service. Holsters was about the only thing that leather work that I did. We left there, and when we got discharged, well, went back to Fort Worth, and couldn't find a job with any of the shops. Nobody needed anybody. And so my uncle come to me and said, "I know where you can go to work." I said, "Okay, where?" I had helped him. He was a plumber. And I'd helped him some off and on when I was growing up in the summers. And he said, "Well, there's a town out here that is building a sewer plant, and there is not a plumber out there, and they're going to have to hook every one of them houses." I think there was 200 and something houses in this house, this little town, Springtown. And he said, "Take my backhoe out there and it may be a month before anybody is ready to hook up, but says you can get some already dug and the line laid, and all you'll have to do when they turn them loose is to hook up both ends. So I went out there and I didn't do any leather work for a few months, and well, I was doing real good. I was the only one there, and nobody could argue with my price. I set my price, which it was fair, and there was nobody else to go to. And I'd been there a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, and I had about half of the houses onto the line, the sewer line. And this guy thought I was getting rich, and which I was making a pretty fair living, but I sure wasn't really getting a lot of money. I mean, you know, people just got so much they can spend, and you can't be unfair about it. So I set a fair price, and I made a living. But this other guy, he thought that he needed to do it too, and he went and bought a backhoe, and man, he had, somebody told me one day what the payments was on that thing, but he started out, and my uncle had rented me, and he said, just pay me so much for each line that you put in. And so whatever that was, I don't remember, and it seemed like it was $35. But it was an old tractor and an old backhoe, but it worked. It'd get the job done. And this guy, man, he lasted about 2 months, and he went under because he couldn't make as much as he thought, and the payments on his backhoe was so much till it sunk him. But while he was there, he was pretty fast. I'm not sure how good he was, but he put in several, and by the time he pulled out, well, it was slowed down to where it was just trickling in, and we'd got most of them put on line. And so I picked up a little bit of plumbing. In the meantime, I started picking up some odd and end jobs, plumbing, and so we was still hanging on out there. And in the meantime, we had rented a place in the country. Had about 150 acres, and 80 acres of it was peanut allotment. That meant that I could raise 80 acres of peanuts on it, and then you had to buy peanut allotments. You just couldn't plant peanuts just anytime you wanted to, or anywhere you wanted to. The government was regulating peanuts that bad. But anyway, I had 80 acres, and I planted peanuts, and I think I broke even on that, and we bought some calves and run on the rest of the grass, and we didn't do bad with the calves. They made us some money, and so got a call from Wendy, or the shop foreman for Wendy, and wanted to know if I wanted to come to work for Ryan's. And so I decided, yeah, I want to get back into leather work. And so I went to work for Ryan's tooling for Mr. Myers. Yep.
Okay, we've got our skirt plates already cut out and skived. Anywhere except the outside edge, we've skived the edge down to where it'll blend in with the skirt and not make a bulge or a wrinkle in the wool skin. Anywhere we're going to sew, like we'll be coming up here and coming up on this with the stitcher, we taper that a little bit further so it doesn't bog the machine down. Same way out here, here, and here. The rear plugs I cut into two pieces. You don't have to, but I do it just because I can use up some smaller pieces of scrap. The plugs, this edge here, I skive at approximately a 45-degree angle, same way on this here. So they will lap. I can glue them together and it makes a good joint. We will position them, making sure that we've got plenty of room on the outside, so we won't be cutting too short on the plugs, making sure it overlaps the outside edge. This is something I do. It's not necessary, but once you put glue on them, it's easy to know where to put your plugs back exactly without having to move them around, possibly pull them up, unglue them, and then have to redo them. So I get them in place before I put glue on them and mark them. And that way I know exactly where to go back with them. Make sure that you don't get up on the bar here or back here, because if you get up on the impression that we've made for the bars, then that's going to cause a knot and it could hurt your horse's back. Now we apply glue to them.